Folks, my name is Brian Leeson. I'd like to welcome you all to this press conference for the launch of the campaign for public housing. The format we're going to go for, I'm going to just say a few words myself initially, and then it'll be followed by other speakers. Councillor Éirigí, Anthony Flynn from Inner City Help and Homeless, Councillor Cieran Perry, and Eugene McCartan. So, the campaign for public housing, it is an alliance of political organisations, elected representatives, independents, homelessness groups and housing groups. It's come together in the last few weeks to develop a common set of demands and a common analysis of the housing crisis. And we're now today as our first press conference, and it'll be followed by a public launch at 2 o'clock in Unite headquarters on Saturday. The campaign itself has four demands: universal access to public housing, the end of economic evictions, the creation of a Bill of Rights to protect those in the private rental sector, to provide them with security of tenure and affordable rent, and also a referendum to enshrine the right to public housing, which is a significant difference to some of the other discussions that have been had in recent weeks in terms of the right to housing. Before I pass on to any of the speakers, I'm just going to focus on the issue of the core demand of our campaign, which is that of universal access to public housing. So in essence, what we're talking about here is a new approach to public housing, or a new approach to housing. Our analysis is that the current crisis, the roots of the crisis, go back at least 50 years, that there has been a process of gradual creeping privatisation which has created the current crisis. Virtually every aspect of the housing system has been privatised, and this has brought us to the point of crisis. Other people, Anthony Flynn is going to talk specifically about how in terms of homelessness and so forth, how dramatic that crisis now is. We believe the solution to the housing crisis is the creation of a new public housing system. That system would allow all citizens who are in need of home access public housing. That is fundamentally different to the current system of social housing, where there is a low income limit set on those who can access social housing. We're talking about an entirely different system based on the concept of the state building and providing public housing for all citizens, and for those houses to be rented, for those homes to be rented to citizens at an affordable rate of related to their income. So the fundamental difference between social housing currently is and the public housing that we are proposing is universal access, that everyone will have access to a home and that their rent will be based upon their income. Now, we understand the key sort of block that people put forward to that is the suggestion that this cannot be done, that it is too expensive. We would argue that it's been proven the private sector say they can't build a home for less than 330,000 euro. It has been proven in the last year that homes can be built from as little as 140,000. The Cllr Housing Cooperative in Ballymun have built housing for that kind of prices. And we believe that the state can build housing cheaper than anybody else. We take out the profit margin of the developers, take out the profit margins of the speculators, take out VAT, take out levies, take out charges. Bulk purchase of raw materials will lead to houses being built far cheaper than the private sector can do it, and then spread the cost of that housing over the lifetime of the house, over 30, 40, 50, 100 years, through rental income of tenants. What we are calling for, this departure in public housing, we believe would be the most dramatic change in housing policy since the foundation of the state. We believe it has the potential not alone to solve the housing crisis, but also to challenge inequality across our society. The current approach to housing, the private developer-led approach to housing, has been an environmental, an economic and a social disaster. We believe a new system of public housing would be environmentally sustainable, break down inequality within our society, and release billions of euros of dead money that is currently going into landlords and into mortgages by allowing ordinary working people to rent homes at an affordable rate. The core concept: public housing for all, universal access to public housing where the state provide all citizens by right with access to high quality public housing. So that's the core demand of our campaign. We are also calling for an end to economic evictions of all descriptions. In the current crisis, it is unacceptable that banks or private landlords would evict anybody and put them into homelessness. I'm going to ask Anthony Flynn to speak first or next on that topic. He's from Inner City Helping Homeless. He is one of the homeless organisations that is supporting the campaign. And Anthony has very detailed first-hand experience of the homelessness crisis in the city. And as I say, Inner City Helping Homeless have signed up to our demand for public housing for all citizens.
I suppose, as Brian said, we'll be backing the campaign for public housing and universal access to public housing for all. Over the last 50 years or so, what we've seen is systemic failures from the state in order to provide public housing right the way through the country, which has led us to a situation where we've over 120,000 people on a social housing waiting list, we've over 8,000 people that are homeless, and we've over 3,000 children within that homeless situation. Again, systemic failures and over-reliance on the privatisation of the private market has led us to that situation. Over the lack of investment into public housing or social and affordable housing over the last number of years has put us into a situation now where we're unable to cater for all of those that are waiting at the moment. We are over-reliant on the private market. Brian did speak about the Cllr model, and that seems to have worked very, very well in Ballymun, and that type of model going forward is something that we would be very supportive of. And again, as Brian said, taking out all of those unnecessary taxes and charges that need to be there, or don't need to be there, is something that needs to be looked at. I suppose we're in a situation now where the 2020 plan from government and the Rebuild Ireland plan has basically failed, or already failed, and we've looked at review after review in regard to that, and we're in a situation where they're definitely not going to meet targets in regard to the Rebuild Ireland plan. So I suppose that the campaign for public housing will be the biggest social housing campaign or social housing build if this goes forward, and we'll be fully supportive of that.
Okay, thanks, Anthony. I should just as well just run through some of the organisations that are supporting the campaign already. These, in the space of the last sort of 2 weeks, we expect the individuals and organisations to increase over the coming weeks. But as we stand at the moment, with the support of the Communist Party of Ireland, Councillor Cieran Perry, Independent, Éirigí, the Dublin 8 Altogether Now group, Inner City Helping Homeless, the Workers' Party, Father Peter McVerry, the 1916 Societies, Dundrum Housing Action, Catherine Connolly TD, Dublin Bay North Housing Crisis Community, Clare Daly TD, Catherine Connolly TD, and Mick Wallace TD. We would expect those numbers to grow significantly over the coming weeks, especially off the back of our launch here on Saturday. So I'll hand you over now to Councillor Eilish Ryan, who's going to speak on the land initiatives in Dublin City Council.
Thanks very much. Thanks for coming for the launch this morning. So we're constantly hearing that public housing is a critical part of addressing the housing crisis, and we generally hear that it's one of many solutions. That's not something we agree with. We think public housing is the only way to tackle the housing crisis. But even if we think about it as just one of the solutions that are necessary, the critical thing that this Dublin City Council and every city council needs in order to tackle the housing crisis is land. There's absolutely no way physically we can build public housing without land. Now, through the Housing Land Initiative, Dublin City Council is currently in the process of handing at least 50% up to 70% of the biggest sites of public land that it owns, places like O'Devaney Gardens, Oscar Training Road, Michael's Estate, over to private developers for private housing to be sold for profit at market rates. And what we hear is that this is to promote a healthy mix of incomes within those communities. But if we look at the figures that are there, Dublin City Council currently owns 120 hectares of land within Dublin City Council. That's enough to build 12,000 houses. There are 12,000 apartments or houses at quite a high density. There are 20,000 people on the Dublin City Council housing list. So the figures just don't add up. At a minimum, we need to be using all of the public land that we own in order to build public housing. And and we need to be acquiring more in order to build more. The idea that we can ever solve the housing crisis if we pursue a strategy of handing public land over for private development is absolute nonsense. The figures just don't add up. So one of the core components of a campaign for public housing is A, that all public land should be used to build public housing only, and B, that in order to get a mix of incomes within those communities, public housing should be available to everybody. So what we're hearing is that the 50% private housing being built on council-owned land, that housing is going to address the housing crisis that many people who work are facing. So people on average wages of 35,000 euro and people earning slightly above that. In Dublin at the moment, it's not possible for those people to access housing. But critically, it won't be possible for them to access housing if it's built through the private market either. So in O'Devany Gardens, they're going to be building 300 units of housing for people on middle incomes. Right over the wall from O'Devany Gardens, there's the first new housing development, and I'd say about a decade, being built in Dublin 7, and 2-bedroom terraced houses are being sold for 495,000 euro. So the idea that the private market can address the housing crisis for people on low incomes or the housing crisis for people on average incomes is absolute nonsense. And the first thing we need to do is ensure that public land is used for public housing. It'll be a critical part of the campaign over the next number of weeks. Thank you.
Thanks, Eilish. I'm going to now invite Councillor Cieran Perry to speak on the topic of the quality of house builds.
Thanks, Brian. Just a few really brief comments, possibly stating the obvious. In terms of building quality, public housing, we believe, is the answer. If we compare the quality of the build back in the dark economic times of the 1930s and 1940s, if we compare that to the quality of build during the so-called Celtic Tiger, I think it's obvious which level of quality wins hands down. I don't think we'll ever know the level of poor quality built during that period, because there's numerous estates that we're aware of unofficially that don't meet even the most basic of fire standards, but the tenants are afraid that that will be publicised, so that and with the resulting fall in value. So a lot of this has been retrofitted privately and on the quiet. There's been enough public examples of the absolute disgraceful lack of quality, and probably more importantly, the lack of regulation on the statutory authorities such as Dublin City Council. With public housing, as we've proved in the 30s and 40s, we didn't have that difficulty. Now what we have is, we already have concerns over quality. What we have is the pro-developer politicians and the senior council officials pushing to officially lower the standards. We've had the suggestion of the shoebox apartments. We've had the suggestion of that the higher high-rise. We've agreed fewer dual aspect windows. And in this morning's paper, there's a report from the Surveyors of Ireland which actually advises not to build so fancy buildings. I think that says it all. There's no talk from government or even the council officials of implementing a vacant site tax, which we believe would have an immediate effect. Instead, it's to try and appease the developers, to try and appease the landholders, to encourage them to actually build instead of forcing them. There's been too much carrot, in our opinion. What we need now is a bit of stick. So just on the smaller issue of quality, even that we believe is answered by public housing. Good morning.
Thanks, Aaron. Just for Eugene McCartan.
Yeah, just a question of, this campaign is not opposed to any other campaign, but we want to maximise the involvement of all organisations concerned about and interested in and campaigning for public housing. It should be right across the country. We want all organisations to take part, to participate. It's open, democratic, and we want the maximum people to turn up on Saturday at the meeting to participate fully, and we will try to create forums where we can have people can air their views, discuss and debate, and to campaign actively around this whole question of public housing for the people. Because the only solution, because today we look at the property speculation, it's not in a speculator's interest to build a house today, because they leave it to next year, they'll make another 30,000-40,000 grand very easily, just by sitting on a piece of land. They can make millions overnight. So it's very important that we get maximum participation of organisations and communities to campaign around the whole issue of public housing for all.
Thanks, Eugene. Yeah, before we take a few questions, I suppose, as heard from the various speakers here, the core analysis of this campaign is that the private sector has failed and failed abysmally, and that the solution, not part of solution, this solution, is a new system of public housing which will be available to all who are in need of housing regardless of their income. We believe that will break down the ghettos of the past, that it will release billions of euros of money that is currently being sucked into mortgages and rental, dead money that would be released into the real economy. We believe it can be done financially. It is possible to build housing far, far cheaper than private developers are doing it. We know that the land is there. We know that the houses can be built at a cheaper price. We know that the demand is clearly there for the housing. The only thing that is missing is political will. And what this campaign intends to do, like the water movement that we saw over the last couple of years, is build political will through mass protest on the streets, through the lobbying of politicians, through the engagement of civil society across the trade unions, across political groupings, homeless groups, housing groups, tenants groups, to bring them all together in a partnership, an equal partnership, around this core demand for a dramatic new approach to housing, of making public housing universally available. And a final example I would say is, of course, as is ever the case in Ireland, the naysayers will say that it can't be done. Well, I would ask them to look at Vienna, where 60% of the population live in public housing. School teachers, low income, high income, police, civil servants, private enterprise, all living in public housing. 60% of the population of Vienna living in public housing. So it can be done. At the moment we're sitting at somewhere around 10%, and we're calling for a dramatic programme of construction and procurement to bring the percentage of public housing dramatically higher than it currently is.